How's it going, everybody? Jason here, and today I'm doing a 3-year update on the Alesis Strike Pro kit. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Hope you're staying safe wherever it is you are in the world. Right off the bat, if I had to go back in time and buy this kit again, would I? And the answer is yes, but I would buy the base version, not the expanded version. So I bought this in November of 2017. I paid about 1,800 Canadian, tax included, because I traded in my old Roland TD6V set, I believe, the one with the rubber pads. So it cost me about 1,800 Canadian, which was way less than half of an equivalent Roland set at the time. So the reason why I bought it in the first place is there were a few things that were important for me. Number one, I knew I wanted an electronic kit because I wanted something quiet that I could play whenever I wanted. Number two, I wanted the look and feel of an acoustic kit. So yes, it does look like an electronic kit, but I wanted the regular pad sizes. So at the time, it was the only set that came out with a 14-inch snare, 8, 10, 12, and 14-inch toms right from the factory. So I was pretty happy with that from the start. The next thing I wanted to do was to get into recording, and there are plenty of options for recording with the Strike Pro. So how has the Strike Pro held up over time? Look and feel wise, it looks great. The cymbals probably are my only complaint because they did get grungy pretty quickly. That matte black hand-hammered look and the type of rubber material that they use looks fantastic out of the box, but it collects dust very quickly, and it's more of kind of like the consistency and the look is totally gone. So it's very gray looking and it looks really used and weathered. I haven't looked to see if there's any kind of cleaning solution that will kind of restore that. But as far as overall fit and finish over the last 3 years, I would say that is my only complaint, which leads me to what has gone wrong with this over the last 3 years. So Alesis has had a pretty bad reputation for poor quality. In fact, when I played the first kit, when I was looking for this, it barely worked at all. It looked like, you know, that episode of The Simpsons where Homer builds the barbecue and they just dumped out the parts on the floor and went, all right, here, go play. Triggering barely worked. You know, some triggers didn't trigger at all, even though they were plugged in. And, you know, I couldn't imagine that the store folks went in and set up the module and just tinkered around with it so much it was in such bad shape. So I had a really bad impression about the quality right from the get-go. I tried it in a second store and it was flawless. So I decided to pull the trigger on it. So as far as the problems that I've had, really two problems in total. One is something many other people have reported. So the plastic piece inside the snare that houses the 4 cones for the snare trigger cracked. So I noticed when I was playing one day, I was getting some kind of dead spots and just weird triggering. Took the head off, sure enough, it was cracked. It's an easy fix, but that's still something that plagues Alesis as far as perception of quality. Apparently it's fixed with newer kits. They've got a beefier piece of plastic in there, but it's still something that people are a little bit gun shy about when it comes to the Alesis drums. Second thing, and this is something, I don't know exactly when this stopped working. I noticed when I was doing a recording video, the edge sensor on my hi-hat doesn't work. So I can even squeeze where the trigger is and nothing shows up on the module. So given how they wrap the rubber around the cymbals, I'm not sure it's supposed to come off. I've kind of tried to lightly pull a little bit to see if I can, you know, unscrew the screws from the bottom of it and pull that off and see if maybe there's a loose wire. But it's not coming off easily and I don't really want to break it. So I've really only had those two things go wrong. I have replaced the kick drum head, and that's just a normal wear and tear thing. The beater actually went right through the first layer of the kick head. I did replace the snare head with a DrumTech Real Feel head, which feels way, way better than the stock heads that it comes with. I've left the toms alone. So actually when my bass drum, when it ripped through that first layer, I just used the snare head on it and replaced it. So other than that, quality-wise, I haven't really been plagued with a lot of the problems I've seen other people. My hi-hat has never been that bad. I mean, the playability and the feel is terrible, but I really haven't had any problems with, you know, triggering and dynamics, other than now, obviously, that the edge sensor doesn't work. So overall, you know, the module's been rock solid. It's never crashed on me. It's never spontaneously rebooted. And they have done some firmware updates over time as well to improve it. So ongoing updates. They haven't updated the firmware for about a year now. The last was November 2019, around that time when version 1.5 came out. Up until then, they had done a bunch of updates. So here's a few playing examples of the flagship kit, just so you can hear the raw sounds just straight coming out of the Strike, the left and right stereo outputs with the 3 flagship kits that they added over time when they were updating the firmware. Okay, so the other things that they've updated with the firmware, they've tinkered with the hi-hat a lot over time. So Alesis had a bad reputation for having a really bad calibrated hi-hat that people just could not seem to dial in. So they've experimented with different ways to set that up. First, it was kind of a manual setup. Then I think in version 1.3, they had automatic calibration. So you'd hit a calibration button on the module and you would play along and it would automatically do that for you. Now they just have more simple options. So you've got the ability to adjust the chick sound. So basically the sensitivity of when you're stomping on the hi-hat foot pedal, plus the sensitivity of the open and closedness of the actual hi-hat itself. So they did do lots of updates, and then I think they kind of rerouted all of their programming and resources to the new Strike Pro SE because they haven't updated the firmware in just over a year now. I imagine they will though, so if they've kind of put the money into that new upgraded kit, I would guess, you know, hopefully over the next few months or so, they're going to add a new version of firmware to take it to the next level. So probably the biggest update they did with the firmware was when it shipped, it had that really gross, ugly black and white LED-ish looking screen. But the screen was actually capable of being a full color display. So when they upgraded the firmware, I think this was 1.3, maybe 1.4, it upgraded to full color. So the display looks fantastic. The actual sound module itself, what I do like about it is that it's got the mixer on the front. So it's pretty easy to just adjust your sounds without having to dig through a menu, which is pretty cool. Plus the output options, if you compare it again to an equivalent Roland module, you get much more features. So that leads me to the next point around if you're in the market for an electronic kit, what is different that's out there nowadays? So I think the closest comparison to the Strike Pro SE kit, which is about $32.99 Canadian, is the Roland V80 305s. They are about $300 more here in Canada. They're $35.99. The module, you couldn't compare the two. You get more of a basic module with the Roland. You don't get as many outputs. You don't get as many features and customization options. I'm not going to go into the details of those, but you do get arguably a better looking kit. I think Roland really nailed it with the new acoustic design electric kits that they've been releasing. So when it comes to buying something now, obviously budget is important. And when I mentioned in the opening, I would buy the kit again, but I would buy the base version. What I would actually do, I'd buy the base version for $22.99. I'd sell the kick drum, I'd sell the hi-hats, and then I would buy the new SE version because now you can finally get them on drumtech.com. So you could probably save $400, $500, $600 depending on where you are in the world by doing that. You could probably sell the stock Alesis kick for $400 or $500 if it was brand new. The hi-hats probably for a couple $100, and then it would cost you, I wouldn't think it would cost more than $1,000 just doing the conversion from the Drum Tech website to replace those, and then that would make this kit fantastic. All right, so what have I used this kit for? So early on, I was pretty much using it on a daily basis, mostly for practice and recording. So I've recorded with MIDI, with the stereo left and right outputs, plus the individual outputs. And probably the first couple of years, I used it daily and pretty heavily. So I'm a pretty heavy hitter coming from a rock background, and it's held up pretty well. But really what I use it for mostly now is practicing and songwriting. So a lot of the times I'll just have my earbuds in and I'll just be playing a song that I might have just recorded. Or if somebody else in the band sends me a song, I'll put the earbuds in and I'll play without the module even being on. So I can just start to kind of hear what is it, you know, how might the drum parts work with this particular part of the song. If I'm doing recording, I mostly use the acoustic kit now for any of our band's stuff. So I've used it on about 5 or 6 commercial recordings. Sound-wise, I think really what I would change is just how I actually mixed the songs. So the sounds in the Strike Pro, I think, are better than the Roland equivalents. I think Roland has better hi-hat snare sounds. I think the Strike module has probably one of the best sounds of any of the modules out there. I think for my ears, the Pearl Mimic Pro has the best. The Strike I would put maybe a tie for first or maybe a little bit behind it. But as far as, you know, Roland's pads have always sounded artificial to me for some reason, and the cymbals. I think the Strike really nailed it with those sounds. Okay, so final thoughts after owning the Alesis Strike Pro for 3 years. I would happily buy this thing again, and the only thing I would really swap out would be the hi-hats. So depending on what kind of cash I had lying around, I would replace the kick drum and the hi-hats, but definitely the hi-hats, and that's mostly just because of playability. So I really haven't had any problems with the dynamics or the sounds. I mean, the edge trigger doesn't work anymore. So obviously that's a bit of a bummer, but I would replace it just on feel alone because it is like hitting concrete blocks. It just does not feel anywhere near as good as the Roland hi-hats, and definitely nowhere near acoustic hi-hats. But that said, I don't think I could ever justify spending $1,000 on a VH11 set of hi-hats. I would probably go with Joe Becky hi-hats, possibly the Fields hi-hats because they're made out of metal, so I would think they would have a pretty good feel to it. And then, you know, possibly the ATV Artist hi-hats. They do have 360 edge triggering around them, and they're supposedly great to play. If you want to see more comparisons about that, check out 65 Drums channel because he's done a ton of different comparisons on lots of electric kits, plus a bunch of different hi-hat variants. So really that would be about the only thing I would do differently. The kick I could live with. I mean, it does move around, but a smaller kick is going to move around compared to the 20-inch kick that comes with the SE kit. So no matter how you have it set up, and they actually say this in the manual, that if it moves around, it's probably a user error. It's the way you've actually set it up. I've got mine to stay relatively stable, but playing double bass or like hitting the kick really hard, it does move around, and it's always going to move around. It's just a smaller drum than the bigger kick drum. But I could probably live with it because I do have it dialed in pretty well. So if you have any questions about the Alesis Strike Pro, drop them in the comments below. I put some links to a few of the commercial songs that I've used it on, plus some links to some of the other videos for recording. So to wrap up, yep, I think it's awesome. I would absolutely buy it again. I think the sounds are better than Roland overall, and fit and finish, it's held up very well for me over the years. The cymbals kind of look a little bit worn out, but that's not that big of a deal. I still think it's a great drum set, not even for the price, for any price tier. So for half the price of one of the high-end Roland drum sets, you get something that sounds just as good, if not better. And I haven't been plagued by a lot of the quality problems that I've seen other people talk about as well. So really, I think that's the only thing to weigh, is if you're willing to take the risk on Alesis's perceived lower quality compared to Roland. So like and subscribe. I'll see you on the next video, and I hope you have a great holiday season.